In 2019, a beekeeper opened up a perfectly healthy hive and found something strange. Dozens of worker bees clustered tightly around their own queen, not protecting her, but suffocating her to death. No predator, no disease, no rival queen waiting to take over, just her own colony turning on her. Which raises an obvious question. Why would a hive ever kill the one bee its entire survival depends on? Hi, I'm Mara, and this is Microplanet. You'd think loyalty to the queen would be absolute. After all, she's the only bee in the hive that can lay eggs, which means she's the only reason a colony has a future at all. But it turns out worker bees aren't loyal to her specifically. They're loyal to whatever keeps the colony alive, and sometimes killing the queen is exactly what that requires. There are three main reasons a hive turns against its queen, and the first is failing fertility. A queen mates early in life and stores enough sperm to last her for years, but that supply isn't infinite, and as she ages or gets sick, her egg laying can slow down or become unreliable. Worker bees monitor this constantly through a chemical signal called queen pheromone, which the queen produces and which spreads through the hive as workers touch and groom her. When her egg production drops, that pheromone signal weakens too, and a weaker signal is basically the hive's way of realizing the queen isn't doing her job anymore. Once enough workers sense the decline, they begin raising a replacement, and the moment that replacement is ready, the old queen's fate is usually sealed. This process, fittingly, is called supersedure. The second reason is that the hive has gotten too big for one queen to keep up with. A single queen can only produce so much pheromone, and as a colony grows into the tens of thousands, that pheromone has to reach every single bee to keep the whole hive feeling unified. In a massive, overcrowded hive, the pheromone signal can become diluted simply by distance. Bees on the far side of a packed colony may barely sense her at all. When that happens, workers can behave as though the queen isn't really there, even though she physically is. Some of them respond by starting queen cells of their own, preparing the colony to split off in a process called swarming, where the old queen actually leaves with half the colony while a brand new queen takes over what's left behind. The third reason is the most aggressive, and it happens when the queen has already been replaced but didn't actually leave. Sometimes a hive raises a new queen while the old one is still alive and still in the hive. Maybe she recovered some egg-laying ability right as her replacement hatched. Maybe the timing was simply off. Either way, a hive generally doesn't tolerate two queens for long. Workers eventually have to pick one, and the way they pick is brutal. They form a tight ball around the queen they've rejected, vibrating their bodies and raising the temperature inside that ball high enough to cook her to death from the inside. Beekeepers call this balling, and it's specific. Workers almost never do this to a queen they still consider useful. The behavior is reserved for one they've already chemically and behaviorally written off. So, how do you tell which of these three things actually happened in any given hive? Usually, you look at the timing. If beekeepers find an aging queen quietly disappearing while a new one calmly takes over with no real chaos in the colony, that's supersedure, a smooth, planned succession driven by failing pheromone signals. If half the colony is gone and a swarm cluster shows up on a nearby tree branch, that's swarming. The hive splitting because one queen's signal simply couldn't stretch far enough anymore. And if there's a tight, frantic ball of bees actively heating up around a single queen, that's balling, the most violent version, reserved for a queen the colony has already decided doesn't belong there anymore. All three look, from the outside, like a colony turning against its leader, but none of them are really about loyalty at all. They're about a chemical signal, spreading or failing to spread, telling thousands of individual workers whether the bee at the center of their world is still worth following. Which brings us back to that 2019 hive. The queen the beekeeper found being suffocated wasn't sick exactly, but her pheromone signal had already faded below whatever invisible threshold her own daughters needed to keep believing in her. By the time anyone noticed, the decision had already been made days earlier, one molecule at a time.